This video is how to solve equations with radicals in it. Obviously, solving equations is we take something with an equal sign and we figure out what makes both sides the same. Radicals are square roots, cube roots, any kind of roots. And this one right here, it's just a square root since there's nothing written out front. So the idea is you're going to have to undo the radicals to make it simpler and then use your other techniques from there. This is one of my favorite things to do, and it's really tricky, and that's not my favorite part. But why it's one of my favorites is you have to check your answers when you're done, because sometimes even if you do everything correctly, you'll come up with an extra answer or answers that don't work, and that's kind of a good life lesson. That doesn't happen a lot in math, but it does happen all the time in real life. You can do everything right, you can kind of go through the right steps, but you end up with something that doesn't really work and you have to throw it out. All right, let's look at a relatively simple example here. This is the cube root of x equals 5. So the first thing that I want to take care of is the cube root. That's the most difficult part for me, so I want to get rid of it first. It's already isolated, and the opposite of cube rooting something is to cube it. So what I'm going to do to both sides is to cube. So I'm cubing the entirety of both sides, and there's not much to either side, so it's not that difficult. Well, on the left-hand side, that just gives me x. That was the whole point. And on the right-hand side, 5 cubed is 5 times 5 times 5, which is, let's see, 125. So now that's my answer, but I do have to check and make sure that it works. So I go back to the original. Now I've already kind of marked up my original with blue here, but the original is just the black part. I have to plug it in. So here's what I do. The cube root of x, well, I think x is 125. That's what I figured out. Does that actually equal 5? That's like saying, well, does 5 times 5 times 5 equal 125? Yes, of course. One way you can check this on your calculator is to type in 125 to the power of 1/3, because a 1/3 power is the same thing as a cube root, and you can see if that equals 5, and it does. So this checks out, this answer does work, I'm good. All right, the next one, this is a little bit less simple. As you can see, there's a lot more going on here. The first thing I want to do is get rid of the square root on the right-hand side, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to square both sides. Left-hand side is just x squared. That side's not too bad. Now, the right-hand side is not that bad either. The whole reason why I squared it is to get rid of the square root. The square root encompasses the entire side, so the square root and the square get rid of each other because they're opposite operations. They're opposites. You do one and then the other, you end up with what you started with, x plus 10 over 2. Now looking at that, the next thing that is the most daunting to me is the fraction. The fact that the right-hand side, the whole thing is divided by 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by 2 in order to get rid of that. Now the left-hand side becomes 2x squared, and the right-hand side is just x plus 10 because I divided by 2, but then I multiplied by 2, and those get rid of each other. Now looking at this, this should hopefully look like familiar territory to you. What I have is I have an equation with an x squared in it and a linear term, just an x. And how I solve these things, what I think is the easiest way to do to solve is to get everything to one side and then to try to factor. If factoring doesn't work, then I can always use the quadratic formula. But either way, I want to get everything to one side. I'm going to skip those couple steps in there. But basically what I did is I subtracted x from both sides, and I subtracted 10 from both sides, just to get one side to be equal to 0. Now I want to try to factor, and once again I'll kind of skip over this a little bit, but after you make your diamond problem, you should come up with 2 parentheses, and let me see if I can do it in my head here. I'm imagining the diamond problem without writing it out. It should be 2x and x, and let's see if I do, yes, I think that's a correct area model. Yeah, that looks good. All right, now I use ZPP, you know me, the zero product property. one of those two parentheses has to be equal to 0 if I end up with 0 for the answer to a product. You can't multiply two numbers together and get 0 any other way. So I actually have two possibilities for a solution here. 2x minus 5 could equal 0, or x plus 2 could equal 0. So the easier answer is x equals -2, and the other one, if I add 5 to both sides, then divide by 2, I'm skipping that up here, but I end up with 2.5. So now those are my two answers, but I have to go back and plug them in and see if they do indeed work. So I'll start with 2.5. Let me erase my work here because this is getting a bit confusing for this space. So I'm erasing how I got my answers there. These are just my two possibilities for final answers, 2.5 and -2. Let's try 2.5 first. So what I'm going to do is replace all the x's with 2.5, plug it in, and see if I get what I expect. So obviously the left-hand side is pretty simple there. It's 2.5. The right-hand side is what I need to do some work on. So I do the top of the fraction first, 2.5 plus 10. I get 12.5, divide it in half, then take the square root. And you could type that entire thing into your calculator if you wanted to. But it does end up checking out. You get 2.5 equals 2.5 on both sides. So yes, this is one correct answer. The other one, I want to plug it in as well. So plugging it in, -2, does that actually equal the square root of -2 plus 10 over 2? That's what I'm wondering. I did everything correctly with my work, but I'm still not sure. I have to check to make sure. So obviously the right-hand side is where all the work lies. -2 plus 10 is 8, then 8 divided by 2 is 4. So I have the square root of 4 on that side, and of course the square root of 4 is 2. But I run into a bit of a conundrum, because that doesn't make sense at all. -2 does not equal 2. I haven't made any mistakes here. It's just that this answer did not work out. And maybe you can even see why this arose, because when you square both sides, they actually would be the same. Sometimes when you do this algebraic process, you get an answer that doesn't work out. So what's my final answer? 2.5. That's the only thing that works. All right, why don't you go ahead and pause the video and try these on your own. Once you're done, you can unpause it and check your answers. All right, let's go ahead and see how you did. I'm actually going to go back one slide here and do most of my work. So for the first one, you take the 5th power of both sides. That's a good first step. I get x plus 2 equals, what is -3 to the 5th power? I should have had my calculator out for this. Normally I just ask you guys when you're sitting here in front of me to do all this kind of calculator work for me, but you're not here. 3 to the 5th is 243. So -3 to the 5th power is -243. Then I subtract 2 from each side. And I get x equals -245. I have to plug it back in just to make sure that it does work. So go back to the original, the 5th root of -245 plus 2. Does that actually equal -3? Now keep in mind you have to go back to the very original problem. You can't plug it into any sub-step. You have to go back to the very start. I know that's the most difficult, but then you can go ahead and plug that into your calculator, and yes, it does work out. So -245 does work. A word of caution here, the couple that we've done have only had one answer, and that one has definitely worked out. And the one with two answers, one of them worked out and one of them didn't. That's not the same every time. It does switch around, so you want to make sure that you check every answer. All right, the second one, square both sides. I get x squared equals -7x minus 5 over 2. Then I multiply both sides by 2, and then I'll move everything to one side. So I'll skip a couple steps here. but hopefully this is what you arrived at after you did some of the algebraic work. Then hopefully you tried to factor. And again, I'll skip the factoring work, but hopefully you ended up with that in factored form. And so then your two answers are x equals negative 2.5 and x equals negative 1. Now when you plug those back in, you find that neither one works. So even though I had two possibilities, neither one works. So for this one, final answer is no solution. I had two possibilities, but neither one works, so there's no way to get both sides the same for this one. So how'd you do? Are you able to solve that on your own? Can you do that now? If you can, great. If not, watch the video again or find some different way to keep